Asterisk asterisk, Part 1. Ashes and loss asterisk asterisk. The sun hung low over the Wyoming territory, painting the endless expanse of sage and sand in shades of rust and gold. Margaret Maggie Thompson sat on a wooden crate outside the general store in Dust Creek, watching tumbleweeds dance across the main street like ghosts of better days. At 28, she had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much too soon, eyes that had once sparkled with dreams now dulled to the color of winter sky. It had been 3 months since the raid. 3 months since she'd watched the wagon train burn. Since she'd held James's hand as life leaked out of him onto the dusty ground. 3 months of waking up and remembering she was alone. Mrs. Thompson, called out Mrs. Hadley from the mercantile doorway, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for widows and fallen women. "Your washing's ready for pickup." Maggie rose slowly, smoothing down her faded calico dress. She'd taken in laundry to survive honest work that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering too far into dark places. The other women in town whispered about her behind their fans, wondering why she didn't remarry, why she kept to herself, why she never cried at her husband's grave. They didn't know the truth that ate at her like prairie fire. She'd never loved James Thompson, not the way a wife should love a husband. He'd been a good man, kind and steady, who'd offered her escape from her father's farm. She'd married him out of gratitude and necessity, not passion. And now he was dead because of her, because she'd convinced him to join the wagon train west, chasing dreams of California gold. The jingle of spurs on wood planking drew her attention. A stranger dismounted in front of the Broken Wheel Saloon, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to violence, tall and lean, with shoulders that carried invisible weight. He tied his dust-covered mare to the hitching post. When he turned, Maggie caught sight of his face-angular features marked by sun and sorrow, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, eyes the color of storm clouds. Their gazes met for a heartbeat. Something flickered in those gray depths, recognition. Perhaps, though not of her specifically. More like he recognized a kindred spirit, another soul marked by loss. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of courtesy and disappeared into the saloon. "That's trouble walking on 2 legs," Mrs. Hadley muttered, suddenly at Maggie's elbow. "Came in yesterday, asking about work. Sherman's hired him on as security for the saloon. Mark my words, nothing good comes from men who wear their guns that low." Maggie gathered her bundle of clean laundry, the stranger already dismissed from her thoughts. She had enough ghosts to carry without borrowing trouble from gray-eyed drifters. The Broken Wheel was already rowdy by the time evening painted the sky purple. Ethan Callahan nursed his whiskey at the bar, keeping his back to the wall and his eyes on the room. 5 years since Appomattox, 5 years of drifting, and he still couldn't shake the habit of watching for threats. The war had ended, but for men like him, the fighting never really stopped. "You're the new gun," slurred a cowhand, sidling up beside him. "Heard you rode with Quantrill's boys." "You heard wrong," Ethan replied quietly, not looking at the man. "My mistake." The cowhand grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Must have been some other Ethan Callahan who burned his way through Kansas, some other rebel ghost who... Ethan's hand moved faster than thought, pinning the cowhand's wrist to the bar. "That name belongs to a dead man," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You'd do well to leave him buried." The saloon fell silent. Sherman, the owner, stepped forward with a shotgun cradled in his arms. "No trouble in my place. Boys, you..." He nodded at the cowhand. "Get on home. Sleep it off." The cowhand yanked his hand free, rubbing his wrist. "Ain't no trouble here, just making conversation with the hero of Lawrence." The word hero dripped with venom. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his peace. After the cowhand stumbled out, Sherman approached. "I hired you to prevent trouble, not cause it," he said. "Man was looking for a fight. I declined to give him one." Sherman studied him. That true about you being the rebel ghost? Does it matter? Not to me. Long as you keep the peace and don't shoot any customers. I don't care if you're General Lee himself, but others might not be so understanding. Ethan nodded and returned to his whiskey. Outside, a woman's scream cut through the night. He was moving before conscious thought, muscle memory from 100 skirmishes. He burst through the saloon doors to find 3 men surrounding someone in the alley beside the building. The yellow light from the saloon windows illuminated the scene the cowhand from earlier and 2 friends, closing in on a woman pressed against the wall. "Evening, boys," Ethan called out, hand resting on his Colt. "Lady doesn't seem interested in your company." "This ain't your business, Reb," the cowhand snarled. "I'm making it my business. Walk away." 3 against 1, I like those odds. "Your counting's off," said a female voice. The woman stepped into better light, and Ethan recognized her, the widow from that afternoon. She held a derringer steady in her small hand, aimed at the nearest man's back. Seems even to me. The cowboys looked between Ethan's practiced stance and the woman's unwavering gun hand. The cowhand spat in the dirt. "This ain't over, Reb, not by a long shot." They melted into the darkness, boots echoing on the packed earth. Ethan waited until they were gone before turning to the woman. Up close, he could see the steel beneath her grief, the kind of strength forged in frontier fires. "You all right, ma'am?" Mrs. Thompson," she corrected, lowering the derringer. "And I had it handled." "I don't doubt it. That's a nice piece. 2 shot. 1 shot was all I'd need." She tucked the gun into her skirt pocket. "Thank you for stepping in, though I didn't require saving." "Didn't say you did. Sometimes it's just nice not to face the wolves alone." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor. Quickly sealed. "I should go. I have work early." "I'll walk you." "That's not necessary. Ma'am, those boys are drunk and angry. Let me see you safe home. Call it professional courtesy, one person who can handle themselves to another." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. They walked in silence through the dusty streets, past darkened shops and houses where lamplight painted windows gold. Her small adobe sat at the edge of town, neat and solitary. "This is me," she said at the gate. "Ethan Callahan," he offered. "I know who you are." Her voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "The whole town's talking about Sherman's new hired gun." "And what do they say?" "That you're trouble, that you got blood on your hands, that you're running from something." "All true, I expect." She tilted her head. "Yet you came to help me tonight." "Even troubled men can do right sometimes." "Mrs. Thompson." "Maggie," she said softly. "My name is Maggie." He touched his hat brim again. "Evening, Maggie," as he walked back to his rented room above the saloon. Ethan couldn't shake the image of her standing in that alley with perfect calm, ready to defend herself against 3 men. Most people saw a grieving widow. He saw a survivor. And one thing he'd learned in 5 years of running survivors recognized their own kind. In her adobe, Maggie leaned against the closed door, heart still racing. Not from fear she'd faced down worse than drunk cowboys. No, it was something else that made her pulse quicken. The way the stranger had moved. Decisive and dangerous. The way he'd looked at her not with pity or judgment, but understanding. She moved to the small table where James's photograph sat in its silver frame. His kind face stared back at her, frozen forever in sepia tones. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as she did every night. Sorry for not loving him enough. Sorry for leading him west. Sorry for surviving when he didn't. Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon, and the desert wind rattled her windows like bones. Maggie Thompson prepared for another sleepless night, unaware that Ethan Callahan lay awake 3 streets over, remembering the steel in her spine and the sorrow in her eyes. In Dust Creek, where secrets were currency and the past never stayed buried long, Two damaged souls had recognized something in each other. Whether that recognition would lead to salvation or destruction, only time would tell. But the West had a way of forcing such reckonings, whether folks were ready or not. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2, Desert Wind and Secrets, asterisk. Asterisk. The weeks that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Ethan Callahan had become a fixture at the Broken Wheel, his presence alone enough to discourage most troublemakers. He moved through his days like a man walking in his sleep present but not truly there, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Maggie Thompson, too, had her routines, washing on Mondays and Thursdays, mending on Tuesdays, delivery on Wednesdays and Fridays. The women of Dust Creek brought her their linens and work clothes, dropping them off with minimal conversation and exact change. She was useful to them, nothing more a service, not a person. It was at the well on a scorching Tuesday afternoon that their paths crossed again. Maggie struggled with the pump handle, the mechanism stiff from lack of recent rain. The desert had been particularly unforgiving this season, and the water table had dropped. "Let me," Ethan said, appearing beside her like a shadow. She stepped back, watching as he worked the handle with steady strokes until water gushed forth, clear and cold. He filled her bucket without being asked, then filled his own canteen. "Obliged," she said quietly. "Well's getting low," he observed. "Might be a hard summer." "Aren't they all?" She lifted the bucket, but he took it from her hands. "Where to?" "Mr. Callahan, I don't need—" "I know what you don't need. Mrs. Thompson. But my mama raised me to help when I could, and I'd like to think some of her teaching stuck despite everything else." There was something in his voice, a hint of the man he'd been before, whatever had carved those lines around his eyes. Maggie found herself nodding. They walked to her adobe, him carrying the water, her trying not to notice how the afternoon sun caught the silver threading through his dark hair. At her gate, she finally spoke. Would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer for your help." He hesitated, and she could see the war in his eyes, the desire for simple human connection, battling against whatever walls he'd built. "I wouldn't want to impose." "You wouldn't be—" Her small kitchen was neat and sparse, everything in its place. He sat at the scrubbed pine table while she prepared the coffee, moving with economical grace. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, but full of unspoken questions. "You're not from here," she said finally, setting a cup before him. "Georgia, originally. Been a lot of places since the war, among other things." He wrapped his hands around the cup, scars visible on his knuckles. "You're not local either. Your accent says Nebraska, maybe Iowa." "Kansas," she corrected, then stiffened. Of all the places to be from, why did it have to be Kansas? She watched his face carefully, but his expression didn't change. "Pretty country," he said simply, or it was. She wanted to ask if he'd been there during the war, if he'd been part of the raids that turned her home state into bleeding Kansas, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way he said, "or it was," with a weight that suggested personal knowledge of its destruction. "Your husband," he said carefully. "Sherman mentioned you lost him recently. 3 months ago, Apache raid on our wagon train." She kept her voice steady through long practice. "He was trying to protect the Webster children when—" "I'm sorry." 2 words, but they carried more genuine sympathy than all the flowery condolences she'd received from the town's proper ladies. Maybe because he understood loss, knew that sometimes sorry was all you could say. "Were you married?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I apologize. That's not my business." "Was—" He stared into his coffee. "Sarah. We had a daughter, too. Emma." His voice caught slightly on the names. "They died while I was away fighting. Fever took them, along with half the county. I wasn't there. The weight of that last sentence filled the small kitchen. Maggie understood that particular guilt, the survival, the absence, the terrible knowledge that being there might not have changed anything, but at least you would have tried. "More coffee?" she asked softly. He nodded, and she poured. And they sat in shared silence that said more than words could. This became their pattern. Chance meetings at the well, brief conversations at the mercantile, occasionally coffee in her kitchen when the loneliness grew too heavy for either of them to bear alone. The town noticed. Of course, in a place like Dust Creek, nothing went unobserved. "That widow's taken up with the gunslinger, Mrs." Hadley whispered to Mrs. "Pruitt at the general store. Shameless." Mrs. Pruitt agreed. Her husband barely cold in the ground. "You know what they say about women who entertain men unchaperoned." Mrs. Hadley added, loud enough for Maggie to hear as she collected her mail. Maggie kept her head high, paid for her items, and left without acknowledgement. She'd learned that responding only fed the gossip mill. But the whispers followed her home, seeping through the adobe walls like dust. That night, she sat with James's photograph, trying to summon some feeling beyond the familiar guilt. "They think I'm betraying you," she told the sepia image. "But how can I betray something that was never real? I tried. James, God knows I tried to love you the way you deserved, but my heart was always as empty as this desert." A knock at the door interrupted her one-sided conversation. She found Ethan on her doorstep, hat in hand, a purple bruise blooming on his jaw. "May I come in?" She stepped aside wordlessly. In the lamplight, she could see his knuckles were split. "Let me guess," she said, fetching her medical supplies. "Someone shared their opinion about you spending time with a scandalous widow." Tom Morrison had some thoughts on the matter, he admitted, sitting at her kitchen table. I disagreed. She cleaned his knuckles with careful efficiency, trying not to think about how natural this felt. "You shouldn't fight on my account. It wasn't just about you. Morrison had opinions about former Confederates too, seemed determined to share them with his fists. And he's reconsidering his position. Probably won't be talking much for a few days either." Despite herself, Maggie smiled. "You know this will only make the gossip worse." "Let them talk." He caught her hand as she finished wrapping his knuckles. "Maggie, I need to tell you something. About who I was, who I am." Her heart stuttered. "You don't owe me explanations." "Maybe not, but you deserve the truth before this goes any further." He released her hand, his expression grave. "I was at Lawrence." The words hung between them like a death sentence. "Lawrence, Kansas, Quantrill's raid, 150 civilians." "I see," she managed. "Do you? Because I need you to understand. I was 20 years old, full of anger about my brother's death, believing we were soldiers fighting a war. I didn't know." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "No, that's a lie. I knew, maybe not beforehand, but once we were there, once it started, I knew it was wrong, and I didn't stop it. Couldn't stop it. Could barely stop myself." Maggie sank into the chair across from him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to be better than what I was. Because you deserve to know what kind of man you're having coffee with. Because if you tell me to leave right now and never come back, at least I'll know it's for the truth, not the whispers." She studied his face, the guilt etched in every line, the self-loathing he wore like a hair shirt. She recognized it because she saw it in her own mirror every morning. "I was engaged before James," she heard herself say, "to a boy named Robert. He was sweet, romantic, everything a girl dreams of. He joined the Kansas militia to fight the Missouri Raiders. Came home in a box 3 months later." She met Ethan's startled gaze. James was Robert's older brother. He proposed out of duty. I accepted out of grief, and we spent 2 years pretending that was enough. I convinced him to head west because I couldn't bear another day in that house. surrounded by Robert's ghost. "So you see, Mr. Callahan, we both have our dead to carry." The lamp flame flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Outside," a screech owl called, its cry like a lost soul. "What do we do now?" Ethan asked finally. "I don't know," Maggie admitted, "but I'm tired of carrying the dead alone." He reached across the table, palm up, and after a long moment, she placed her hand in his. Not a promise, not yet, but a possibility. Two broken people in a broken land, finding something worth salvaging in each other. The desert wind howled around the adobe, and somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang their lonely songs to the stars. But inside, for the first time in months, neither Maggie nor Ethan felt quite so alone. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 3. Trembling hands, asterisk, asterisk. The morning dawned clear and deceptively calm. Maggie had agreed to accompany Ethan on a supply run to the outer homesteads she needed to deliver mended clothes, and he'd been hired to check on the Wells family, who hadn't been to town in weeks. It was practical, she told herself. Safer to travel together. Nothing more. They set out just after sunrise, Ethan on his mare and Maggie driving her small wagon. The desert stretched before them, painted in pastels that would soon burn away under the climbing sun. For the first hour, they traveled in comfortable silence, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves on hard-packed earth. "Storm coming," Ethan observed, studying the western horizon where clouds massed like an approaching army. "Those clouds are miles away," Maggie replied, but she'd lived in the territories long enough to know how quickly weather could turn. By noon, they delivered the laundry and found the Wells family safe but low on supplies, their well running nearly dry. Mrs. Wells, heavily pregnant with her fourth child, pressed a jar of preserved peaches into Maggie's hands as payment. "You're an angel for checking on us," she said, then glanced at Ethan with less warmth. "And good of you to bring protection. These are dangerous times." They were 5 miles from town when the storm hit. It came like a living thing, a wall of wind and dust that turned day into twilight. The horses screamed, fighting their traces. Sand bit exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Maggie could barely see Ethan's silhouette through the swirling chaos. "There," he pointed through the storm. "Adobe ruins 1/2 mile." She couldn't see what he saw, but trusted his instincts. He dismounted, grabbed the bridle of her lead horse, and guided them through the tempest. The wind tried to tear them apart, to scatter them across the desert like seeds, but he held firm. The abandoned homestead materialized from the storm like a ghost ship. Half the roof had collapsed, but one room remained intact. They fought the horses into the partial shelter of a standing wall, then stumbled into the surviving structure. The door slammed shut behind them, reducing the storm's roar to a muffled rage. They stood gasping, covered in dust, grateful for the sudden stillness. As their eyes adjusted to the dimness, they took stock of their shelter, a single room with thick adobe walls, a fireplace black with old soot, and a narrow bed frame in the corner, its mattress long since rotted away. "Well," Maggie said, attempting lightness despite her racing heart, "this is cozy." Ethan was already checking the walls for stability, testing the remaining roof beams. "Solid enough. We'll wait it out." He glanced at her, concern creasing his brow. "You hurt?" "No, just—" She gestured at herself, covered head to toe in red dust. A bit worse for wear. They spent the next hour making the space habitable. Ethan brought in their supplies and checked on the horses, now somewhat calmed in the lee of the walls. Maggie found old furniture to break up for firewood. As the storm raged outside, they built a small fire in the fireplace, grateful when the chimney drew properly. Hungry, Maggie unpacked the food she'd brought: cold biscuits, dried beef, the jar of peaches from Mrs. Wells. They ate sitting on the floor near the fire, backs against the wall. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew fiercer as evening approached. The temperature dropped with the sun, and soon their small fire was the only warmth in a world gone cold and hostile. "Could be stuck here all night," Ethan observed. "Wouldn't be the first time I've slept rough." But even as she said it, Maggie felt the weight of their isolation, alone with a man who wasn't her husband, in an abandoned homestead, while the world howled outside. The town gossips would have a field day if they knew. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan said, "I can sleep outside with the horses once the storm passes." "Don't be ridiculous. You'd freeze." She pulled her shawl tighter. "We're both adults. We can share a shelter without anything improper happening." But even as she spoke, she felt the charge in the air between them, more electric than the storm outside. These past weeks of careful friendship, of shared coffee and guarded conversations, had only fed a hunger neither wanted to acknowledge. They tried to maintain distance as night fell, but the cold was merciless. The fire consumed their meager wood supply too quickly. Soon they were sitting closer, sharing her shawl, sharing warmth, sharing the terrible intimacy of mutual need. "Tell me about Georgia," Maggie said, desperate for distraction. "Before the war," his voice rumbled against her shoulder where she'd unconsciously leaned into him. "Green, so green it hurt to look at sometimes. Magnolias blooming in spring, their scent so heavy you could swim in it, summer nights full of fireflies and cricket song." His voice grew distant. "Seems like someone else's life now." "I miss the tall grass," she admitted. "In Kansas, before the troubles, you could walk through prairie grass taller than your head, like a golden ocean when the wind caught it right. You ever think about going back?" "Nothing left to go back to." She turned to look at him, finding his face closer than expected. "You... same..." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Maggie, don't..." But she didn't pull away. "Please don't say whatever you're thinking." "Why not?" "Because once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. And we both have enough regrets." The wind chose that moment to rip something loose from the roof. They heard it tumbling away into the darkness. The storm was stealing pieces of the world, remaking everything in its image of chaos. "What if I don't want to take them back?" His free hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "What if I'm tired of being careful, of being proper, of pretending I don't think about you every waking moment?" "Ethan..." Her voice broke on his name. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me this is wrong, and I'll go sit with the horses right now, storm or no storm." She should. Every rule she'd been raised with, every propriety, every shred of reputation she had left demanded she send him away. But Maggie was too tired of being empty, tired of going through the motions, tired of feeling dead inside. Instead of speaking, she raised her hand to cover his where it rested against her cheek. That small gesture broke something in him. He made a sound, part sigh, part prayer, and drew her closer, drew her. The kiss was desperate, full of months of suppressed longing and years of accumulated loneliness. It tasted of dust and sorrow and wild, impossible hope. When they broke apart, both were trembling. "God help me," Ethan breathed against her lips. I don't have the strength to walk away from you." She understood. The storm had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw need, not just physical, though that hummed between them like a struck chord. But the deeper need for connection, for feeling alive again, for something real in a world of ghosts. Her hands shook as she reached for the buttons of her high collar, loosening them one by one. The firelight flickered across his face, showing wonder and fear in equal measure. "Maggie, you don't have to..." "I know." Her voice was steady now. "Sure. But I want to... For once in my life, I want to choose something for myself. Choose to feel something. Choose you." He caught her hands in his, stilling them. "You're sure?" I've never been sure of anything except this: we're both already damned by our pasts. At least together. We might find some kind of redemption. The storm raged on, but inside their small shelter, time seemed to pause. Two broken souls reaching for each other in the darkness, finding in that connection not just comfort but resurrection. They came together like the desert drinks rain desperately, completely, holding nothing back. Later, as they lay entwined on their makeshift bed of blankets, the fire burned low, and the storm finally began to exhaust itself. Ethan pressed his lips to her hair. "What happens when the sun rises?" Maggie asked softly. "I don't know." His arms tightened around her. "But whatever comes, I won't let you face it alone." She believed him. For the first time since watching James die, she believed in something beyond mere survival. It might be foolish, might bring nothing but more pain, but in this moment, warm and alive in Ethan's arms, while the world tried to tear itself apart outside, Maggie Thompson remembered what it felt like to hope. The storm passed with the night, leaving a world scoured clean and strange. But inside the ruins, two people who'd thought themselves beyond saving discovered that sometimes the greatest act of courage is allowing yourself to be loved. **, Part 4. The Long Night of Dust Creek. They returned to town separately, as if that might somehow preserve the fiction of propriety. But Dust Creek had eyes everywhere, and by noon, whispers followed Maggie through the streets like tumbleweeds. "Spent the night together in the storm. Mrs." Hadley hissed to anyone who would listen. "Found shelter. They claim, as if we don't know what that means." Maggie kept her head high as she went about her work, but inside, each cutting remark and cold shoulder felt like another stone added to the weight she carried. At the Mercantile, conversation stopped when she entered. At the well, women gathered their skirts and hurried away as if her supposed sin might be contagious. Only young Mrs. Davidson, herself an outsider married to a reformed gambler, showed any kindness. "Don't let them break you," she whispered while pretending to examine fabric. "Half these righteous women have secrets that would curl your hair." But it wasn't just the women. The men's reactions were worse: leering grins, suggestive comments, assumptions that a woman who'd been with one man outside marriage might be available to others. Maggie began carrying her derringer openly, letting its pearl handle catch the light as a warning. Ethan faced his own reckoning at the broken wheel. "Heard you got caught in that storm with the widow Thompson," Sherman said, polishing glasses with studied casualness. "Lucky you found shelter." "We were fortunate," Ethan replied evenly. "I'll bet you were." Tom Morrison, jaw still swollen from their last encounter, lounged against the bar. "Must have been real cozy, just the two of you." Widow probably appreciated the comfort. The saloon went quiet. Ethan set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care. "Choose your next words carefully, Morrison. Or what you'll defend her honor." Morrison laughed ugly. "What honor? Everyone knows what kind of woman takes up with ye." He never finished the sentence. Ethan's fist connected with his nose in a wet crunch. Morrison hit the floor hard, blood streaming between his fingers. "Anyone else have opinions about Mrs. Thompson?" Ethan asked the room at large. Silence answered him. He turned to Sherman. "I'll be outside if you need me." He spent the rest of his shift on the saloon's porch, watching the street and fighting the urge to find Maggie, to stand guard over her like some lovesick boy. But he knew his presence would only make things worse for her. The town had made up its mind, and nothing short of divine intervention would change it. Divine intervention came in an unexpected form 3 days later. Jed Hollister rode into Dust Creek with a dozen men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of those who made their living outside the law. Hollister himself was a study in contradiction, expensively dressed but trail dusty, cultured voice but killer's eyes. He'd made his fortune running guns to whoever paid best, Union or Confederate, Apache or settler. War was good business, and Jed Hollister was very good at business. He took rooms at the hotel and immediately began throwing money around. Drinks for everyone at the Broken Wheel, generous tips at the restaurant, ostentatious purchases at every shop. Within hours, he owned the town's attention. "I'm looking to establish a permanent presence here," he announced at the saloon that night. "Dust Creek is perfectly positioned for my enterprises. Remote enough for privacy, close enough to the border for convenience." Sherman, counting the night's exceptional take, didn't ask what those enterprises might be. Neither did anyone else. Money talked louder than conscience in a town perpetually on the edge of survival. It was the next morning when Hollister first saw Maggie. She was hanging laundry behind her adobe, fighting the perpetual wind that tried to tear the sheets from her hands. The morning light caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper. When she reached up to pin a pillowcase, her worn dress pulled tight across her figure. Hollister stopped mid-stride, struck by the sight. Here was something worth having, beauty weathered but not broken, strength tested but not defeated. He made inquiries. The widow, Thompson, Mrs. Hadley, was eager to share, especially with such a wealthy audience. Poor thing, lost her husband to savages, and now... She leaned in conspiratorially. "Well, I shouldn't gossip, but she's taken up with that gunslinger Sherman hired. Quite the scandal." "Is that so?" Hollister smiled like a cat spotting an unguarded cream pot. "How interesting." He began his campaign that afternoon, appearing at Maggie's door with an enormous bouquet of wildflowers. Where he'd found them in the desert was anyone's guess, and his most charming smile. "Mrs. Thompson Jed Hollister, I wanted to introduce myself and offer my condolences on your loss." Maggie, wary of this well-dressed stranger, accepted the flowers with cool politeness. "Thank you, Mr. Hollister. That's kind but unnecessary." Kindness is never unnecessary, especially for a lady managing alone in such a harsh place. His eyes traveled over her small adobe, clearly calculating. "If you ever need anything, supplies, protection, companionship, please don't hesitate to ask. I manage quite well on my own." "I'm sure you do. But why merely manage when you could thrive?" He tipped his hat. "I'll bid you good day, but I hope we'll speak again soon." After he left, Maggie stood holding the flowers, unease crawling up her spine like a scorpion. There was something about Hollister that reminded her of the wolves that sometimes came down from the mountains, patient, calculating, deadly. At the Broken Wheel that night, Hollister made his interest more explicit. "Tell me about this Mrs. Thompson," he said to Ethan, who was manning his usual post by the door. "Lovely woman. Tragic story. Is there something you need, Mr. Hollister?" "Just making conversation. I heard you and she are acquainted." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Thompson is a respectable woman who's been through enough hardship." "Indeed, which is why I'm thinking of offering her my protection. A woman alone in a town like this, well, anything could happen." Hollister's smile was all teeth. "Of course, if she already has a protector, that's different. But from what I hear, you're just Sherman's hired help, hardly in a position to offer her anything substantial. She doesn't need your protection." "No, then whose?" Hollister leaned back, studying Ethan with the eye of a man who'd survived by reading others. "Ah, like that. Is it, tell me, Mr. Callahan?" "It is Callahan, isn't it? The famous rebel ghost. What exactly can you offer her besides more scandal? You're a man with blood on his hands and a price on his head in 3 states. Hardly husband material." Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun, but Hollister just laughed. "Go ahead. Draw on an unarmed man in front of witnesses. That'll certainly help Mrs. Thompson's reputation." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. "Think about it. Ghost. You care for her, then stop dragging her down with you. Let someone who can actually protect her, provide for her, elevate her, do so. He left Ethan standing there, fists clenched, knowing the bastard was right. What could he offer Maggie besides more whispers, more shame, more danger? The answer came the next night when Maggie herself appeared at the saloon, an unprecedented event that stopped every conversation mid-word. She walked straight to Ethan, chin high despite the shocked stares, and muttered disapproval. "We need to talk." He led her to the small office Sherman used for bookkeeping, closing the door on the buzzing speculation. "Hollister came by again today," she said without preamble, "with a business proposition. He wants to buy my house for 3 times what it's worth. When I refused, he offered to marry me." Ethan felt like he'd been punched. "What did you say?" "I told him I needed time to consider." At his stricken look, she quickly added, "I'm not going to accept. But Ethan, he's not a man who takes no for an answer. And he made it clear that things could become difficult for me if I refuse." "I'll kill him." "No." She grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what he wants. An excuse to have you arrested or shot. He sees you as the only thing standing between him and what he wants." "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am." The words tasted like ashes. "Maggie, what am I doing to you? Your reputation is ruined because of me. Now you've got a dangerous man circling you like prey. I've brought you nothing but trouble." She studied his face, seeing the self-loathing resurface. Without a word, she locked the office door, then pulled him down for a fierce kiss. "Listen to me, Ethan Callahan," she said against his lips. "My reputation was my cage. You didn't ruin it, you freed me from it. For the first time in years, I feel alive. I won't let Hollister or this town or even your guilty conscience take that away." "But what kind of life can I give you? He's right, I'm nobody, with nothing to offer but a violent past and an uncertain future." "You're the man who makes me remember what it feels like to hope," she said simply. "That's everything." They stayed in that small office longer than was wise, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to the same piece of driftwood. Outside, they could hear the saloon returning to its normal noise level, but they both knew the gossip would spread like wildfire. When they finally emerged, Hollister was at the bar, watching with knowing eyes. He raised his glass to Ethan in a mock toast, his smile promising trouble to come. The lines were drawn. In a town where respectability was currency and violence was always one insult away from exploding, Maggie and Ethan had chosen each other over safety, propriety, and good sense. The price for that choice would come due soon enough. Part 4. The Long Night of Dust Creek ****. They returned to town separately, as if that might somehow preserve the fiction of propriety. But Dust Creek had eyes everywhere, and by noon, whispers followed Maggie through the streets like tumbleweeds. "Spent the night together in the storm. Mrs. Hadley hissed to anyone who would listen. "Found shelter, they claim, as if we don't know what that means." Maggie kept her head high as she went about her work, but inside, each cutting remark and cold shoulder felt like another stone added to the weight she carried. At the Mercantile, conversation stopped when she entered. At the well, women gathered their skirts and hurried away as if her supposed sin might be contagious. Only young Mrs. Davidson, herself an outsider married to a reformed gambler, showed any kindness. "Don't let them break you," she whispered while pretending to examine fabric. Half these righteous women have secrets that would curl your hair. But it wasn't just the women. The men's reactions were worse, leering grins, suggestive comments, assumptions that a woman who'd been with one man outside marriage might be available to others. Maggie began carrying her derringer openly, letting its pearl handle catch the light as a warning. Ethan faced his own reckoning at the broken wheel. "Heard you got caught in that storm with the widow Thompson," Sherman said, polishing glasses with studied casualness. "Lucky you found shelter." "We were fortunate," Ethan replied evenly. "I'll bet you were." Tom Morrison, jaw still swollen from their last encounter, lounged against the bar. Must have been real cozy, just the two of you. Widow probably appreciated the comfort. The saloon went quiet. Ethan set down his whiskey glass with deliberate care. Choose your next words carefully, Morrison. Or what you'll defend her honor? Morrison laughed ugly. What honor? Everyone knows what kind of woman takes up with He never finished the sentence. Ethan's fist connected with his nose in a wet crunch. Morrison hit the floor hard, blood streaming between his fingers. Anyone else have opinions about Mrs. Thompson? Ethan asked the room at large. Silence answered him. He turned to Sherman. I'll be outside if you need me. He spent the rest of his shift on the saloon's porch, watching the street and fighting the urge to find Maggie, to stand guard over her like some lovesick boy. But he knew his presence would only make things worse for her. The town had made up its mind, and nothing short of divine intervention would change it. Divine intervention came in an unexpected form 3 days later. Jed Hollister rode into Dust Creek with a dozen men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of those who made their living outside the law. Hollister himself was a study in contradiction, expensively dressed but trail dusty. Cultured voice but killer's eyes. He'd made his fortune running guns to whoever paid best. Union or Confederate, Apache or settler. War was good business, and Jed Hollister was very good at business. He took rooms at the hotel and immediately began throwing money around. Drinks for everyone at the Broken Wheel. Generous tips at the restaurant. Ostentatious purchases at every shop. Within hours, he owned the town's attention. I'm looking to establish a permanent presence here, he announced at the saloon that night. Dust Creek is perfectly positioned for my enterprises. Remote enough for privacy. Close enough to the border for convenience. Sherman, counting the night's exceptional take, didn't ask what those enterprises might be. Neither did anyone else. Money talked louder than conscience in a town perpetually on the edge of survival. It was the next morning when Hollister first saw Maggie. She was hanging laundry behind her adobe, fighting the perpetual wind that tried to tear the sheets from her hands. The morning light caught in her hair, turning it to burnished copper. When she reached up to pin a pillowcase, her worn dress pulled tight across her figure. Hollister stopped mid-stride, struck by the sight. Here was something worth having beauty weathered but not broken, strength tested but not defeated. He made inquiries. The widow Thompson, Mrs. Hadley was eager to share, especially with such a wealthy audience. Poor thing, lost her husband to savages, and now, she leaned in conspiratorially. Well, I shouldn't gossip, but she's taken up with that gunslinger Sherman hired. Quite the scandal. Is that so? Hollister smiled like a cat spotting an unguarded cream pot. How interesting. He began his campaign that afternoon, appearing at Maggie's door with an enormous bouquet of wildflowers where he'd found them in the desert was anyone's guess, and his most charming smile. Mrs. Thompson Jed Hollister, I wanted to introduce myself and offer my condolences on your loss. Maggie, wary of this well-dressed stranger, accepted the flowers with cool politeness. Thank you, Mr. Hollister. That's kind but unnecessary. Kindness is never unnecessary, especially for a lady managing alone in such a harsh place. His eyes traveled over her small adobe, clearly calculating. If you ever need anything, supplies, protection, companionship, please don't hesitate to ask. I manage quite well on my own. I'm sure you do, but why merely manage when you could thrive? He tipped his hat. I'll bid you good day, but I hope we'll speak again soon. After he left, Maggie stood holding the flowers, unease crawling up her spine like a scorpion. There was something about Hollister that reminded her of the wolves that sometimes came down from the mountains, patient, calculating, deadly. At the Broken Wheel that night, Hollister made his interest more explicit. Tell me about this Mrs. Thompson, he said to Ethan, who was manning his usual post by the door. Lovely woman, tragic story. Is there something you need, Mr. Hollister? Just making conversation. I heard you and she are acquainted. Ethan's jaw tightened. Mrs. Thompson is a respectable woman who's been through enough hardship. Indeed, which is why I'm thinking of offering her my protection. A woman alone in a town like this, well, anything could happen. Hollister's smile was all teeth. Of course, if she already has a protector, that's different. But from what I hear, you're just Sherman's hired help, hardly in a position to offer her anything substantial. She doesn't need your protection. No, then whose? Hollister leaned back, studying Ethan with the eye of a man who'd survived by reading others. Ah, like that. Is it, tell me, Mr. Callahan? It is Callahan. Isn't it the famous rebel ghost? What exactly can you offer her besides more scandal? You're a man with blood on his hands and a price on his head in 3 states. Hardly husband material. Ethan's hand drifted toward his gun, but Hollister just laughed. Go ahead. Draw on an unarmed man in front of witnesses. That'll certainly help Mrs. Thompson's reputation. He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. Think about it. Ghost. You care for her, then stop dragging her down with you. Let someone who can actually protect her, provide for her, elevate her, do so. He left Ethan standing there, fists clenched, knowing the bastard was right. What could he offer Maggie besides more whispers, more shame, more danger? The answer came the next night when Maggie herself appeared at the saloon, an unprecedented event that stopped every conversation mid-word. She walked straight to Ethan, chin high despite the shocked stares and muttered disapproval. We need to talk. He led her to the small office Sherman used for bookkeeping, closing the door on the buzzing speculation. Hollister came by again today, she said without preamble, with a business proposition. He wants to buy my house for 3 times what it's worth. When I refused, he offered to marry me. Ethan felt like he'd been punched. What did you say? I told him I needed time to consider. At his stricken look, she quickly added, I'm not going to accept. But Ethan, he's not a man who takes no for an answer. And he made it clear that things could become difficult for me if I refuse. I'll kill him. No. She grabbed his arm. That's exactly what he wants. An excuse to have you arrested or shot. He sees you as the only thing standing between him and what he wants. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am. The words tasted like ashes. Maggie, what am I doing to you? Your reputation is ruined because of me. Now you've got a dangerous man circling you like prey. I've brought you nothing but trouble. She studied his face, seeing the self-loathing resurface. Without a word, she locked the office door, then pulled him down for a fierce kiss. Listen to me, Ethan Callahan, she said against his lips. My reputation was my cage. You didn't ruin it, you freed me from it. For the first time in years, I feel alive. I won't let Hollister or this town or even your guilty conscience take that away. But what kind of life can I give you? He's right, I'm nobody, with nothing to offer but a violent past and an uncertain future. You're the man who makes me remember what it feels like to hope, she said simply. That's everything. They stayed in that small office longer than was wise, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to the same piece of driftwood. Outside, they could hear the saloon returning to its normal noise level, but they both knew the gossip would spread like wildfire. When they finally emerged, Hollister was at the bar, watching with knowing eyes. He raised his glass to Ethan in a mock toast, his smile promising trouble to come. The lines were drawn. In a town where respectability was currency and violence was always one insult away from exploding, Maggie and Ethan had chosen each other over safety, propriety, and good sense. The price for that choice would come due soon enough. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 5. Blood on the Prairie, asterisk, asterisk. The trap was set with the patience of a spider spinning its web. Jed Hollister had not built his empire by being impulsive. For 2 weeks after Maggie's rejection, he played the part of the gracious gentleman, tipping his hat when he passed her on the street, making no further advances, even expressing public regret for his forwardness. "Perhaps I misread the situation," he told Mrs. Hadley loud enough for half the town to hear. "A lady's prerogative to choose. After all, I wish Mrs. Thompson nothing but happiness." The performance was so convincing that some began to question their initial wariness. Maybe they'd misjudged him. Maybe he really was just a successful businessman looking to settle down. Ethan wasn't fooled. He recognized the tactics of a predator lull the prey into complacency. Let them lower their guard, then strike. He tried to warn Maggie, but even she began to wonder if they were being paranoid. "He's been nothing but polite," she said one evening as they sat by her fireplace. A rare moment of peace in their turbulent courtship. "Maybe he's actually accepted my refusal." "Men like Hollister don't accept anything," Ethan replied. "They just change tactics." He was proven right 3 days later. It started with Sheriff Watson, a man who'd held his position through a careful balance of selective blindness and occasional enforcement. He appeared at the broken wheel just as Ethan's shift was starting. "I got a telegram from Kansas," Watson announced, unfolding the paper with theatrical slowness. "Seems they're still looking for one Ethan Callahan. Wanted for war crimes. Says here he goes by the Rebel Ghost. Substantial reward for information leading to capture." The saloon fell silent. Ethan's hand hovered near his gun, but Watson made no move to arrest him. "Fortunately," the sheriff continued, "that telegram seems to have gotten lost somewhere between here and my office. Terrible how unreliable these modern conveniences can be." He looked directly at Ethan. "Of course, if more telegrams were to arrive, or if certain upstanding citizens were to insist on justice being done, well, that'd be different." The message was clear. Hollister had found his leverage. That night, Ethan told Maggie he was leaving. "No," she said flatly, not even letting him finish his prepared speech. "Whatever noble sacrifice you're planning, the answer is no." "Maggie, be reasonable. If I stay, Hollister will have me arrested or hanged. If I go—" "If you go, he wins, and I'll be alone again. Only this time it'll be worse because I'll know what I'm missing." She crossed her arms. "Besides, you think he'll just leave me be once you're gone. He's not the type to gracefully accept defeat." She was right, and they both knew it. Hollister had shown his cards he wanted Maggie, and he'd destroy anything standing in his way. Running would only delay the inevitable. "Then we face him together," Ethan said finally. "Together," she agreed. The confrontation came sooner than expected. The next afternoon, Maggie was returning from delivering laundry when she noticed her front door ajar. She'd locked it when she left. Living alone had made her careful about such things. Heart pounding, she pushed the door open to find Hollister sitting at her kitchen table like he owned the place. 3 of his men lounged around her small parlor, their presence violating the sanctuary of her home. "Mrs. Thompson." Hollister smiled. "Forgive the intrusion, but we need to discuss your future." "Get out of my house." Now, no need for hostility. I'm here to make one final offer, generous, considering the circumstances." He leaned back, completely at ease. "Marry me, and I'll ensure your paramour leaves town alive. Refuse, and, well, Sheriff Watson is eager to collect that reward money." "That's your idea of a proposal, blackmail?" "I prefer to think of it as negotiation. You need protection, respectability, security. I can provide all 3. In return, I get a beautiful wife to grace my arm and warm my bed. Everyone wins. Except I don't love you." "Love," Hollister laughed. "My dear woman, this is the frontier, not a penny dreadful. Love is a luxury few can afford. But I'll treat you well, dress you in silks, give you a life of comfort. That's more than a failed gunslinger can offer." Before Maggie could respond, the door burst open. Ethan stood in the doorway, gun drawn, taking in the scene with deadly calm. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "you're trespassing." Hollister's men tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but their boss remained relaxed. Mr. Callahan, how fortuitous. We were just discussing your future or lack thereof." He stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to holster that weapon, walk out that door, get on your horse, and ride out of Dust Creek forever. In return, I won't have you arrested for the massacre at Lawrence." "Counteroffer," Ethan said. "You and your men leave now, and I won't paint these walls with your blood." 4 against 1. Those aren't good odds, even for the famous rebel Ghost. 5 against 4, Maggie corrected, her derringer now pressed against the skull of the nearest gunman. "And at this range, I won't miss." The tension stretched taut as piano wire. One wrong move, one twitched finger, and the small adobe would become a charnel house. It was Hollister who blinked first. "Stand down, boys. No need for unpleasantness. We'll continue this conversation later." He tipped his hat to Maggie. "Ma'am." They filed out slowly, Hollister pausing at the door. "This isn't over. Callahan, one way or another, I get what I want." After they left, Maggie sank into a chair, hands shaking. Ethan bolted the door and went to her, pulling her into his arms. "Pack what you need," he said. "We're leaving tonight." "Running won't solve this." "Neither will staying, but at least running keeps you safe while I figure out how to end this." She pulled back to look at him. "You mean kill him?" "If necessary. And then what, we spend our lives looking over our shoulders, always running from the next Hollister, the next town that judges us." She stood, pacing. "No, I'm tired of letting men like him dictate my life. If we run now, we'll never stop running." A sound outside made them both freeze horses. Multiple riders, moving fast. Ethan peered through the window and cursed. "What is it?" "Posse led by Watson." He checked his guns, mind racing through options. "Back door." "They'll have it covered. Ethan, if you fight—" "I know. A shootout with the law would make him an outlaw everywhere, not just in Kansas. But surrender meant a noose." The knock came hard and official. "Ethan Callahan, this is Sheriff Watson. Come out with your hands empty, or we come in shooting." Maggie grabbed Ethan's arm as he moved toward the door. "Wait, let me think." Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the kitchen window. "The root cellar. It connects to the old mine shaft. James showed me once it comes out near the creek." "You want me to run, leave you to face them alone?" "Better than watching you die. Go, I'll delay them. Tell them you left hours ago." When he hesitated, she pushed him toward the kitchen. "Go find proof about Hollister's gun running. It's the only way to fight back." "Maggie." "If you love me, go, live, come back for me." The pounding intensified. "Last warning, Callahan." Ethan kissed her fierce and quick, then disappeared through the hidden cellar entrance just as the front door exploded inward. Watson and 5 deputies flooded in, guns drawn. They searched the small house efficiently, finding nothing but a frightened woman. "Where is he?" Watson demanded. "Gone," Maggie said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Left this morning after Hollister's visit. Said he wouldn't be the death of me." Watson clearly didn't believe her, but without proof, there was little he could do. As his men continued searching, Hollister himself appeared in the doorway. "Sheriff, might I have a word with Mrs. Thompson privately?" Watson hesitated, then nodded to his men. They filed out, leaving Maggie alone with the man who'd orchestrated all of this. "Clever," Hollister said, walking slowly around her parlor. "The cellar entrance was well hidden, but my men will find where it leads soon enough." Maggie kept her face carefully neutral. "Here's what happens now," he continued. "Your lover is a fugitive. He'll be shot on sight when found. You, however, still have a choice. Marry me, and I'll call off the hunt. Refuse. He shrugged eloquently. I need time to consider. You have until sunrise. After that, I'll assume you've chosen to share his fate. He moved to the door, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Thompson, don't think about running. I have men watching every road out of town. Alone in her violated home, Maggie allowed herself one moment of despair. Then she straightened her spine and began to plan. Hollister thought he held all the cards, but he'd underestimated both her and Ethan. The game wasn't over yet. Outside, hidden in the gathering darkness, Ethan watched Hollister's men spread out around the town. He doubled back after emerging from the mine shaft, unwilling to leave Maggie despite her plea. Now he studied their positions, memorized their patterns, and prepared for war. Hollister wanted to play rough fine, but he'd learn what happened when you cornered a ghost with nothing left to lose but the woman he loved. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 6. The Abyss and the Light. Asterisk, asterisk. The abandoned prospector's shack sat 3 miles outside Dust Creek, hidden in a canyon that most folks had forgotten existed. It was here that Ethan had taken shelter after the showdown with Hollister's men at the creek. The gunfight had been brutal but brief. 3 of Hollister's gunmen lay dead, but Ethan hadn't escaped unscathed. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, another grazed his ribs, and the ride to safety had nearly finished what the gun started. Now he lay on a moldy bedroll, fever burning through him like prairie fire, drifting in and out of consciousness. In his delirium, he saw faces Sarah and Emma, laughing in the Georgia sunshine before the war took everything. The men at Lawrence, their eyes wide with terror. Maggie, standing in her doorway with her derringer steady, ready to fight the world beside him. He didn't hear the approaching horse until it was almost too late. Training kicked in despite the fever. His hand found his Colt just as the door creaked open. Shoot me and you'll regret it. Maggie's voice cut through his fog. I'm the only chance you have. The gun slipped from his fingers as she rushed to him, her hands gentle but efficient as she examined his wounds. Fool man, she muttered, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt. I told you to run, not take on half of Hollister's gang. Couldn't leave you, he managed through cracked lips. Hush, save your strength. She'd come prepared medical supplies, fresh water, even a bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds. As she worked, she talked, partly to keep him conscious, partly to keep her own fear at bay. The whole town's in uproar. 3 dead men, including Hollister's right hand. He's put $1,000 bounty on your head, dead or alive. She poured whiskey on the shoulder wound, and he bit back a scream. Sheriff Watson's organized search parties. They've been combing the desert all day. You shouldn't be here. Dangerous. Where else would I be? She met his eyes. I told you together. That means in the bad times too, not just when things are easy. Never easy with me, he said, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. I know. That's part of your charm. She finished bandaging his wounds and sat back. The bullet went clean through your shoulder. The other's just a graze. You've lost blood, and infection's trying to set in. But you'll live, probably. Maggie. No. She pressed her fingers to his lips. No noble speeches about dying. No telling me to find someone better. You're going to fight, Ethan Callahan. You're going to live, because I've lost too much already. And I refuse to lose you, too. He caught her hand, holding it despite his weakness. How did you find me? I know you. Knew you wouldn't really run. When I heard about the fight at Copper Creek, I figured you'd need somewhere to hole up. This was James's secret spot. He used to come here to drink when the pressure got too much. Her voice softened. I followed him once. Thought he had another woman. Turns out he just needed somewhere to be weak. We all need that. Yes, she agreed. We do. She stayed with him through the night, bathing his fever, forcing water between his lips, keeping watch. When his temperature spiked near dawn, she stripped to her chemise and lay beside him, using her own body heat to stop his shaking. It was there, pressed against her warmth, that Ethan found his anchor. "Tell me about after," he mumbled into her hair. "After we get through this, we'll go west," she said, understanding he needed something to fight toward. "California, maybe, or Oregon, somewhere nobody knows our names. We'll build a little house, nothing fancy, but solid, with a real glass window so I can watch the sunrise. Garden, vegetables and flowers both, roses like my mother grew, and a porch where we can sit in the evenings, watching the stars come out. Children," the word came hesitant, fragile with hope. She was quiet for a long moment. "Would you want that after everything?" "Want to do it right this time. Be there. Be better." "Then yes, children who'll never know hunger or war, who'll grow up believing the world is mostly good." She felt tears on her cheeks. Is that foolish dreaming of ordinary happiness after all this? "Not foolish, sacred." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Worth fighting for." They dozed fitfully as dawn approached, clinging to each other and their fragile dreams. It was full daylight when the sound of horses woke them. Maggie was at the window in an instant, peering through a crack in the boards. 3 riders, not Hollister's men prospectors, by the look of them. Probably heading to their claim. But if they stop here, they won't. She was already moving, pulling on her dress, checking her derringer. "Stay quiet, I'll handle this." She slipped out before he could protest. Ethan dragged himself to the window, watching as she intercepted the riders near the well. "Morning, ma'am," the lead rider said, clearly surprised to find a woman alone in the canyon. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." "My husband and I are camped nearby." Maggie lied smoothly. "He's sick fever. We're resting until he's fit to travel." Fever. The men exchanged wary looks. Everyone feared contagion in these remote areas where doctors were scarce. "Nothing catching," she assured them. "Just exhaustion and too much sun. But I'd be grateful if you didn't mention seeing us. We're avoiding some family trouble back in town." The prospector studied her, taking in her respectable dress and steady demeanor. "Running from that business with Hollister." Her surprise must have shown, because he continued. "We was in town yesterday for supplies. Heard all about it. That fellow of yours killed 3 of Hollister's bullies. Made himself a hero to some folks, though they're too scared to say so out loud." "He's not—" She stopped, realizing denial was pointless. "He was defending himself. Defending me." "No doubt. Hollister's been squeezing this territory dry for months. About time someone stood up to him." The prospector reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a canvas-wrapped bundle. "Here, extra grub we can spare. And ma'am, there's an old Apache trail about 2 miles west. Follows the canyon rim north to the mountains. Rough going, but it'll keep you off the main roads." "Thank you," Maggie said, genuinely touched. "I won't forget this kindness. Just paying it forward. Had a woman help me once when I was in trouble. Figure it's good karma or some such." He touched his hat. "You take care, ma'am, both of you." After they left, Maggie returned to find Ethan sitting up, Colt in hand, despite his obvious weakness. "See?" she said, showing him the food. "Not everyone's against us." "Good men are rare out here. Good men are rare everywhere. I should know I found one." He pulled her close with his good arm. "Maggie, I need to tell you something. About Sarah and Emma. About why I wasn't there when they died. You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. You've seen my worst already. You should know the rest." He took a breath. "I volunteered to stay behind. Hold a bridge so the rest of the unit could retreat. Seemed heroic at the time. But the truth is, I was running away. Sarah had told me she was pregnant again, and I was terrified. Terrified of losing another child, of failing them again. So I chose what seemed like a noble death over facing my fears." but you survived. By the time I made it home, they were 2 weeks in the ground. The neighbor who'd nursed them said Sarah called for me at the end. Said she understood. Forgave me. But how could she forgive what I can't forgive myself for? Maggie framed his face with her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Because she loved you. Because she knew you're human, not perfect. Because forgiveness is what we give the people who matter, especially when they can't give it to themselves. None of us deserve love. Ethan, we're all broken, all carrying guilt and regrets and might-have-beens, but that's exactly why we need it. She kissed him softly. You're not the man who ran from his family. You're the man who came back for me, who fought impossible odds because you couldn't bear to leave me behind. That's who you are now. That's who I love. He held her tight, feeling something shift inside, not absolution, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. For the first time in 5 years, the ghost of Ethan Callahan felt almost alive. They spent 2 more days in the shack while he regained strength. Maggie snuck back to town once for supplies, returning with troubling news. Hollister's bringing in more men, professional killers from Texas, and there's talk of him buying the sheriff's position outright. She helped him test his draw, noting with relief that his gun hand remained steady. We can't stay here much longer. I know. He was already planning. That Apache trail the prospector mentioned, we take it north. Circle back after dark. I need to get into Hollister's office. Find evidence of his gun running. It's the only way to bring in federal marshals. That's suicide. His hotel is a fortress. Not if he's distracted. Ethan smiled grimly. How do you feel about getting married? She blinked. What? Hear me out. You send word you'll accept his proposal. Big public wedding, whole town invited. While he's playing bridegroom, I search his office. And if you're caught, then you become a very wealthy widow. At her glare, he raised his hands in surrender. I'll be careful. But Maggie, we need to take the offensive. Running just delays the inevitable. She hated the plan, but couldn't argue with the logic. They were trapped between bad options and worse ones. At least this gave them a chance to fight back. That night, as they prepared for what might be their last peaceful moments together, Ethan studied her in the lamplight. Despite everything, the hardship, the fear, the uncertain future, she glowed with fierce life. What? She asked, catching his stare. Just thinking how lucky I am. How many men get a second chance at love, at redemption? This isn't redemption. Ethan, it's just life. Messy, complicated, dangerous life. But it's ours. Ours, he agreed, pulling her close. Whatever happens, remember that what we have is real. It matters. Even if... When, she corrected firmly. When we get through this. When we build that house with the glass window. When our children ask how we met, and we have to figure out how to explain all this madness. He laughed, despite everything. We'll tell them the truth, that their mother was the bravest woman in the territories, that she saved my life in every way that counts. And that their father was worth saving, she added softly. Worth fighting for. Worth everything. They made love like it wasn't goodbye, gentle despite the urgency, holding tight to hope and each other. Outside, coyotes called to the rising moon, and the desert wind whispered secrets to the stones. But inside their ramshackle shelter, 2 hearts beat in defiant rhythm, refusing to surrender to the darkness pressing in from all sides. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, impossible choices, perhaps death itself. But tonight, they had this love carved from loss, hope hewn from heartbreak, and the unshakable certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as they'd promised. Together, ***, Part 7, The Final Choice, ***. Maggie's letter accepting Hollister's proposal created the sensation he'd intended. Within hours, the entire town buzzed with the news. The widow Thompson, after holding out for so long, had finally seen sense. She would marry Jed Hollister in 3 days' time, in the largest social event Dust Creek had ever witnessed. "Smart woman, Mrs." Hadley proclaimed to anyone who'd listen. "Choosing security over scandal, Mr. Hollister will make her a queen of the territory." But not everyone celebrated. "Mrs." Davidson pulled Maggie aside at the mercantile. Concern etched on her young face. "Are you certain about this, after everything with Mr. Callahan?" "Mr. Callahan is gone," Maggie replied, her voice carefully neutral. "A woman must be practical." "Mrs." Davidson searched her face. "If you need help, any kind of help." "You're kind." Maggie cut her off gently. "But my decision is made." That evening, Hollister visited to discuss wedding preparations. He arrived with an entourage, as always, but dismissed them to the porch. Maggie served tea with steady hands, playing the role of accepting bride. "You've made me very happy," Hollister said, studying her over his cup. "I was beginning to think I'd have to implement more drastic measures." "Threats rarely inspire affection. Mr. Hollister." "Jed, please. We're to be married, after all." He set down his tea. "I know this isn't the love match you might have hoped for, but I promise you'll want for nothing. I take care of what's mine. Like you took care of those 3 men Ethan killed." His eyes hardened slightly. "They were tools, expendable. You, my dear, are something else entirely. A prize worth keeping safe." "How reassuring." He leaned forward. "I know you don't trust me yet. Perhaps you even hate me a little. But in time, you'll see I'm not the monster you think. I'm simply a man who knows what he wants and has the means to take it. In this territory, that makes me king. Every king falls eventually. Perhaps, but not today." He stood, pulling out a velvet box, a small token of my esteem. The necklace inside was exquisite diamonds and sapphires that caught the lamplight like captured stars. It was worth more than most people in Dust Creek would see in a lifetime. "It's overwhelming," Maggie managed. "Wait until you see the rest." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I've ordered a wedding dress from San Francisco, flowers from California, champagne from France. Half the territory's influential men are coming. Our wedding will be legendary. All that in 3 days. Money opens many doors." He stepped back to admire the necklace. "Wear this to the ceremony. I want everyone to see that you're mine now." After he left, Maggie touched the cold stones at her throat. Blood money, paid for with violence and intimidation. But it would serve its purpose, keeping Hollister focused on his grand display, while Ethan searched for evidence. She found Ethan at their prearranged meeting spot, a grove of cottonwoods by the creek. He emerged from the shadows like his namesake ghost, still moving carefully from his wounds. "Any problems?" he asked. "He suspects nothing. Too drunk on his own power to imagine anyone would dare cross him." She showed him the necklace. "Look what the proud peacock gave me." Ethan whistled low. That would buy a ranch in California. "Or passage to somewhere he'd never find us." She touched his face, tracing the healing scar. "Are you sure about this, your shoulder?" "It's fine. I've worked through worse." He pulled her close. 3 days. Can you maintain the charade that long?" "I've been pretending most of my life. What's 3 more days?" But her bravado cracked slightly. "Ethan, if something goes wrong..." "It won't." "But if it does, if they catch you, or if Hollister realizes..." "Then you do whatever you need to survive. Understand, no heroics, no rescue attempts. You run, like you ran when I was in danger." He smiled ruefully. "Do as I say, not as I do." They spent an hour going over plans, contingencies, escape routes. But eventually, words ran out, leaving only the weight of what lay ahead. They made love there by the creek, desperate and tender by turns, imprinting memories against an uncertain future. The next 2 days passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Hollister, true to his word, spared no expense. The dress arrived as promised, white silk and Belgian lace that transformed Maggie into something from a fairy tale. Flowers appeared by the wagon load. Musicians were hired from as far as Denver. Through it all, Maggie smiled and nodded and played her part. Only once did her mask slip. When Mrs. Davidson helped her try on the dress. "You look beautiful," the young woman said, then added quietly, but sad, like a princess in a tower. "Sometimes towers are the safest place to be," Maggie replied. Mrs. Davidson adjusted the veil with gentle hands. "I was in a tower once. My husband broke me out. Sometimes I think the breaking free was the real wedding, not the ceremony after." Their eyes met in the mirror, understanding passing between them. "If someone were planning a rescue," Mrs. Davidson said carefully, "they might want to know that Hollister keeps his important papers in a safe behind the painting in his office, and that he dismisses his guards during his afternoon bath, which he takes religiously at 4 o'clock. That's interesting information. Isn't it, Mrs.? Davidson smiled innocently. "I do so love sharing interesting facts." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself had been bought by Hollister's gold. The entire town turned out, drawn by curiosity and free champagne. Maggie stood before her mirror in the hotel's best suite, the diamond necklace cold against her throat, wondering if Ethan was already in position. "You look radiant," Hollister said from the doorway. He entered uninvited, dismissing the attending women with a wave. "Nervous. Should I be—" "Some brides flee at the altar, but then you're not the fleeing type. Are you?" He moved behind her, hands on her shoulders. "You're a survivor, like me. That's why we're perfect together. I've never felt less perfect in my life." "That will pass. After today, you'll be Mrs. Jed Hollister, respected, protected, wealthy beyond imagining." His grip tightened slightly. "Of course. If your former paramour were to appear and disrupt things, well, I have men positioned with very specific instructions." "He won't come. He's not that foolish." "No love makes fools of us all." He released her, moving to the window. Beautiful day for new beginnings, or endings, depending on one's perspective. Down in the hotel office, Ethan worked with desperate efficiency. The safe had been easier to crack than expected. Hollister's arrogance extended to his security. Inside, he found what they needed: ledgers detailing gun shipments to various outlaw bands, correspondence with Mexican revolutionaries, proof of bribes to government officials, enough to bring federal attention even to this forgotten corner of the territory. He was photographing the most damning documents when footsteps echoed in the hall. No time to close the safe. Nowhere to hide. He drew his Colt and waited. The door opened to reveal not Hollister's men, but Mrs. Davidson, eyes wide with urgency. "They know you're here," she whispered. "Someone saw you enter. They're coming." "How many?" "6, maybe more. Mister. Hollister's delaying the ceremony until you're found." She glanced at the open safe. "Did you get what you needed?" "Yes, but—" "Go out the back, through the kitchen. My husband's waiting with horses by the old mill." She grabbed some papers from the safe, stuffing them down her bodice. "I'll create a distraction." "Ma'am, you don't have to—" "My husband was trapped once, too. Someone helped him. Now go." Ethan heard boots on the stairs. No time to argue. He squeezed Mrs. Davidson's shoulder in thanks, then slipped out the back way. Behind him, he heard her scream, "Fire in the hotel," and smiled grimly. Clever woman. In the chaos that followed guests evacuating, Hollister's men torn between searching for Ethan and fighting the non-existent fire, the ceremony fell apart. Hollister found Maggie in her suite, his face twisted with rage. "Where is he?" "I don't know what you mean." He backhanded her, sending her sprawling. "Don't lie to me. This was planned. Wasn't it the whole acceptance? The wedding all a ruse?" She wiped blood from her lip. "Did you really think I'd marry my husband's killer?" "Your husband was weak. I did you a favor." He hauled her to her feet. "But no matter, ghost or no ghost. You're mine now. We'll have the ceremony if I have to hold a gun to your head." "That would certainly make for an interesting wedding story." His hand went to her throat, fingers digging into soft flesh. "You think this is a game? I own this town. I own you. And by sunset, I'll own your lover's corpse." Mr. Hollister." They turned to find Sheriff Watson in the doorway, face grave. "We have a problem. Federal marshals just rode in. They have warrants." "Warrants?" Hollister released Maggie, who gasped for breath. "For what?" "Gun running, sedition, murder of federal agents in Mexico." Watson looked genuinely shaken. "Jed, they have documents, evidence. Someone's been talking." "Callahan," Hollister snarled. Then his eyes narrowed. "No, he couldn't have. The safe." He ran from the room, leaving Maggie with Watson. The sheriff studied her bruised face and sighed. "You should go. Ma'am, this is about to get ugly." "Aren't you going to arrest me?" "For what, being forced into an engagement with a criminal?" He shook his head. "I've done enough dirty work for Hollister. Time I remembered what this badge is supposed to mean." The confrontation came at sunset, in the dusty main street of Dust Creek. Hollister and his remaining men faced off against 3 federal marshals and, surprisingly, half the town's men, including Sherman from the saloon and Davidson, the reformed gambler. "Seems folks got tired of being afraid," Ethan told Maggie as they watched from the hotel balcony. He'd returned during the chaos, unwilling to leave her to face Hollister's wrath alone. "You started something," she said, leaning into his solid warmth. "Gave them courage." "We started something," he corrected. Below, Hollister was negotiating, trying to bribe his way out. When that failed, he went for his gun. The firefight was brief but vicious. When the smoke cleared, Hollister lay in the dust with 3 of his men. The rest had surrendered or fled. "It's over," Maggie breathed. "This part is—" Ethan turned her to face him. "Question is, what comes next?" She touched the bruises on her throat, then pulled off the diamond necklace and let it fall. "We could stay, help rebuild the town without Hollister's shadow." "We could." He searched her face. "Is that what you want?" "I want the glass window," she said simply. "The garden, the ordinary life we dreamed about, and I don't think we'll find that here, where everyone knows our story." "California, then, or Oregon?" "Anywhere." She smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "As long as it's together." They left Dust Creek a week later, after the trials and testimonies were done. Mrs. Davidson pressed a small bag into Maggie's hands as they said goodbye. "Wedding present," she said with a wink, "since your first ceremony was interrupted." The bag contained Maggie's diamond necklace, sold back to a traveling merchant and converted to cash, enough for a new start anywhere they chose. "I can't accept this," Maggie protested. "Consider it justice. Hollister took from this town for years. Seems only fair something go to people who'll use it well." They embraced, 2 women who understood about cages and freedom and the men worth fighting for. As their wagon rolled out of Dust Creek, Ethan took Maggie's hand. "No regrets?" "None." She looked back once at the town that had been her prison and her crucible, then forward to the horizon. "You?" "Just one." At her curious look, he smiled. "I never did propose properly." "Ethan Callahan, are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to build a life with me, to plant that garden and watch those sunrises and maybe, God willing, Raise those children who'll never know what we've known. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Margaret Thompson, will you take a chance on a broken-down gunfighter looking for redemption?
I already have,
she said, pulling him down for a kiss. The answer is yes, always yes. They drove on into the setting sun, leaving the past behind like dust on the wind. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. And for two souls who'd thought themselves beyond saving, that was more than enough. It was everything. Asterisk, asterisk, Part 2 and 8. New dawn over the west, asterisk, asterisk. The railroad camp sprawled across the Nevada landscape like a living thing, all noise and motion and possibility. 6 months had passed since Maggie and Ethan left Dust Creek. 6 months of traveling towards something instead of running from it. Now they stood at the edge of Silver Ridge, a town being born alongside the advancing rails. It's not much, Ethan said, studying the collection of tents and hastily built structures. But the foreman says they'll need permanent buildings soon. Stores, homes, a school eventually. A school? Maggie repeated softly, hand resting on the slight swell of her belly. 3 months along now. Though she hadn't told Ethan yet, she was waiting for the right moment, when the fear of losing this new life didn't choke her every time she thought about it. They'd been married proper in Carson City, in a small church with wildflowers and 2 witnesses pulled from the street. No diamonds, no crowds, no guns, just promises made in quiet voices and sealed with tears of joy instead of sorrow. And Mr. and Mrs. Callahan. They turned to find a portly man in a dusty suit, hand extended. Tom Morrison. I run the general store here, such as it is. Heard you were looking to settle. Ethan tensed at the name, same as the troublemaker from Dust Creek, but this Morrison had kind eyes and an easy smile. We are, Maggie answered. My husband's a carpenter, and I take in washing and mending. Both skills we desperately need. Railroad pays well, but the men are rough on their clothes. Morrison gestured toward a flat area near the river. That section's been set aside for permanent structures. You stake a claim, build something solid. It's yours. Town's offering free lots to families willing to stay. Families, Ethan repeated, glancing at Maggie. We qualify. Far as I'm concerned, any married couple willing to work is family enough. Though between you and me, Morrison leaned in conspiratorially. Babies are especially welcome. Nothing civilizes a wild town faster than the sound of children. After he left, Ethan and Maggie walked to the offered land. The plot overlooked the river, with mountains rising purple in the distance. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, punctuated by train whistles and men shouting in multiple languages. It's loud, Maggie observed. It's alive. Ethan countered. No history here, no reputations, just people building something new. Like us. Exactly like us. They spent the next weeks establishing themselves. Ethan found work immediately. Skilled carpenters were worth their weight in gold to the railroad. Maggie set up her washing business, and within days had more work than she could handle. The railroad men, starved for any reminder of home, treated her with almost reverential respect. It was while building their house that the past caught up with them. Ethan was setting foundation stones when a shadow fell across his work. He looked up to find a familiar face, one of the cowboys from that first night in Dust Creek, when Maggie had held off 3 men with her derringer. Well, well, the rebel ghost, playing house. Ethan straightened slowly, hand drifting to his hammer. That name belongs to a dead man. Does it funny, because I heard Jed Hollister's dead, and you're very much alive. The cowboy Beck, Ethan remembered, spat tobacco juice. Also heard there might still be a reward for information about certain raiders from Kansas. You heard wrong. Federal marshals cleared my name in exchange for testimony. It's all legal and proper now. Legal, maybe, but proper? Beck's eyes glinted mean. Does your pretty wife know everything you did in the war? Every farmhouse burned, every That's enough. Maggie's voice cut through like a blade. She stood behind Beck, a bucket of lye water balanced in her hands. Mr. Beck, isn't it you have two choices? Walk away now, or explain to the railroad boss why you're harassing his best carpenter, and possibly why you smell like you've been dunked in lye. Beck turned, saw the determination in her eyes, and calculated odds. Just catching up with an old acquaintance. Catch up somewhere else. My husband has work to do. After Beck slunk away, Ethan pulled Maggie close. You can't keep defending me from my past. Watch me. She set down the bucket, framing his face with her hands. Ethan, I need to tell you something. She stopped, seeing movement. We have company. A small group approached Morrison from the store, the railroad foreman, and, surprisingly, a minister in traveling clothes. Afternoon, folks. Morrison called out, Reverend Palmer here is passing through. Thought you might like to meet him. He's starting a circuit. Be back through every month or so. The Reverend was young, with the earnest face of someone who'd chosen frontier ministry out of calling rather than convenience. Pleased to meet you. I hear you're building something special here? Just a house, Ethan said carefully. Men of God made him nervous, too aware of his sins. Every home started in love is special. Palmer replied, I hope you'll consider joining us for services. We meet by the river Sundays, since we don't have a church yet. We'll think about it, Maggie said diplomatically. After they left, she turned to Ethan. You looked like he was going to demand confession right there. Old habits. Never had much use for preachers during the war. They blessed both sides while boys died. Maybe this one's different. Maybe we're different. She took his hand, placed it on her belly. Maybe it's time to believe in fresh starts. He went still, understanding dawning. Maggie, are you... 3 months along, maybe 4. Tears started. I was scared to tell you. Scared to hope. But this place, these people, it feels like somewhere we could actually build that life we talked about. He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her stomach. A baby! Our baby! Are you happy? Happy. He looked up, his own eyes wet. Maggie, I'm terrified and amazed and so grateful I can't breathe. He stood, crushing her against him. Winter. The doctor in Carson City said December, maybe January. A Christmas baby. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. In our own house, with that glass window you wanted. You remembered. I remember everything you've ever said about our future. It's what kept me going. They were interrupted by Beck's return, this time with 2 companions. But he hadn't come for trouble. His face was white with fear. Apache, he gasped. War party, heading this way. Maybe 30 Braves. They hit a mining camp north of here, killed everyone. The camp erupted in panic. Men ran for weapons. Women gathered children. The railroad bosses organized defensive positions while arguments broke out about whether to flee or fight. Ethan found himself in the middle of it. His war experience suddenly valuable. Running's no good, they'll pick us off in the open. But fighting means casualties we can't afford. Then what? Morrison demanded. Talk, Maggie said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare. The Apache aren't mindless killers. They're fighting because we're taking their land, their water. What if we offered to share? Share, Beck scoffed. With savages. With people, she corrected firmly. People who were here first. She's right, Reverend Palmer said unexpectedly. I've ministered to Apache converts. They're reasonable if approached with respect. This is madness, Beck protested, but the railroad foreman was thinking, we need the water rights to continue building. If they'll agree to passage in exchange for access. I'll go, Palmer volunteered. I speak some Apache. Not alone. Ethan said, I'll come with you. No, Maggie grabbed his arm. You're not riding off to possibly die. Not now.
Someone has to.
Then I'm coming too. At his expression, she lifted her chin. We face things together. Remember, in the end, it was a delegation of 6 who rode out under a white flag Palmer. Ethan, Maggie, Morrison, the foreman, and, surprisingly, Beck. They met the war party 2 miles from camp, tension thick as summer heat. The Apache leader was older than expected, his face mapped with years of struggle. He studied them with eyes that had seen too much, then focused on Maggie. "You carry life," he said in accented English. "Yes," she replied simply. "Yet you risk it for strangers." "They're not strangers. They're my neighbors, my child's future neighbors. I want my baby born into peace, not war." The chief considered this. "Your people take much, give little." "Then let us change that." Palmer said, "Share the water, share the land, build something together instead of apart." Negotiations took hours, with threats and promises, mistrust and tentative hope. But eventually, an agreement was reached. The railroad would divert water to Apache lands, employ Apache workers, respect sacred sites. Not perfect, but a beginning. As they rode back, Beck pulled alongside Ethan. "Your woman's got sand. Ghost, I'll give you that." "Not Ghost anymore, just Callahan." "Maybe so." Beck was quiet for a moment. "I lost family in Kansas, held on to that hate a long time, but seeing her stand up to those Apache, carrying a baby and still brave as brass, made me think maybe it's time to let go." "Letting go's hard," Ethan admitted. "But holding on is harder. Trust me on that." The town celebrated that night with relief and newfound unity. Nothing builds community like shared danger survived. Maggie and Ethan sat apart, watching the festivities from their half-built house. "You terrified me today," he said quietly. "Riding out there, risking yourself and the baby." "I was terrified too, but I kept thinking about what you said, that I make you want to be better." "Well, you make me braver. Strong enough to face Apache warriors or gossiping townswomen or anything else." "We make each other better," he corrected, pulling her close. "That's what love does. I think takes broken people and helps them build something whole." "Speaking of building," she gestured at their house in progress. "Think you can finish before winter?" "Have to now. Can't have our child born in a tent." He placed his hand on her belly again, still marveling. "Our child. Never thought I'd say those words again. Life's full of surprises. The best one's you." And December came with snow and the cry of new life. Emma Sarah Callahan was born as dawn broke over the mountains, with the town's new doctor attending and half the women of Silver Ridge waiting anxiously outside. When Ethan held his daughter for the first time, he wept without shame. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's loud," Maggie corrected with exhausted joy. "Just like this town." Through the glass window Ethan had installed with special care, they could see Silver Ridge growing, real buildings replacing tents, families replacing drifters, community replacing chaos. The railroad had brought civilization, but it was people like them, the broken seeking wholeness, the lost finding home, who made it stick. Reverend Palmer christened Emma on a bright Sunday by the river, with the whole town attending. Even Beck stood in the back, hat in hand. The Apache chief sent a blessing and a beautifully woven blanket. "Funny how things turn out," Morrison said afterward, bouncing Emma while Maggie and Ethan accepted congratulations. "6 months ago this was empty land. Now look at us, a proper town with proper families." "Nothing proper about us," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "Maybe that's what makes it work," Palmer suggested. "Grace isn't for the perfect. It's for folks brave enough to try again after falling." That night, as snow fell soft outside their windows, Maggie and Ethan sat by their fire with Emma sleeping between them. The house was small but solid, built by their own hands on land fairly earned. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges raising a child, building a community, facing whatever the frontier threw at them. But tonight, they had this warmth and peace and the miraculous ordinary of a crying baby who needed feeding. Ethan changed Emma's wrappings while Maggie prepared to nurse, both moving with the careful dance of new parents.
Remember what you said once?
Maggie asked softly. About God not bringing us together for an easy life. I remember.
You were right. This isn't easy. But Ethan, she looked up at him with eyes bright with tears and joy. It's real. We loved real, despite everything trying to stop us. And now she's here proof that beautiful things can grow from broken ground.
He kissed her gently, tasting hope and home. Outside. Silver Ridge slept under its blanket of snow, the railroad tracks stretching east and west like promises of connection. Somewhere, a coyote howled, but it sounded less lonely now, just another voice in the vast conversation of the frontier. They'd traveled far from that first meeting in Dust Creek, through storm and shadow, blood and tears. But every step had led here, to this moment, this chance at the life they'd dared to dream.
I love you,
Ethan whispered. Both of you, forever. Forever, Maggie agreed, and meant it. In the American West of 1869, forever was a dangerous promise. But for two souls who had already survived the worst life could offer, it seemed like the only promise worth making and keeping. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying these tales, whether you're driving through the countryside, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American West itself. Please share your thoughts and location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this journey with Maggie and Ethan, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, redemption, and adventure on the frontier. Hit that like button and please support by clicking the hype button so this story can reach and touch more listeners. Until next time, partners.